How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. It's very sunny, at least where I'm sitting. So I
Yeah,
always love that.
yeah. I'm noticing the daylight happening more when I wake up.
Thank everything.
Yeah, it helps a lot right now. Thank you so much for being willing to do this, for reaching out and offering to take part in these conversations. And yeah, I'm excited to wherever our conversation goes. Perhaps we can start out like we usually do with each of us introducing ourselves. If you want to share your preferred pronouns and perhaps what you do for the college and how long you've been doing it. And then I'll do the same and then share a little bit of context for these mental health conversations.
Okay, yeah. I'm Chelsea Doyle. She, her pronouns. I work for the Office of Communications. I'm actually the social media person. I have a digital community manager is my official title, but like everyone knows, it's the social media person. So if you follow Bowdoin on any of our social channels, that is me. I'm the face behind it, of creating it and doing all that stuff. I One of the reasons I knew about this was because I was helping with the YouTube, created the playlist and did all that stuff. So that's what I do. And I guess that, I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that is the gist. If I'm
Yeah,
just a
yeah.
social media person.
And how long have you been here, Chelsea?
God, I think it's 7 years this November,
Okay.
maybe.
Okay. Great.
Time, man.
Yeah,
I
right.
think the last time I was in office during November, I got my 5-year pin. So last year would have been my sixth, and I think this would have been my seventh.
Okay. Is
Yeah,
there an actual pin?
there is.
No kidding.
Yeah, yeah. I have it at my office, and I haven't been there in a year. I'm like, it was right there. It was so
I need to talk to someone about that. Thank you, Chelsea. And I'm Roland Mendiola. I work as a psychologist and the interim director in counseling and wellness. I use he, him, and his pronouns. And again, super appreciative to have you with us for this Elephant in the Room series. And really the inspiration and impetus was to, especially during this time that we're all in terms of health and social awareness and cultural identity awareness that's just been so forefront in a lot of our minds these days, wanting to have students and other folks in the community be able to hear voices that across the campus that they might not typically hear, and specifically touching on this intersection of mental health, the pervasive stigma around it, as well as the cultural and identity locations that any of these individuals find themselves in. Because I think there's just an ongoing need for people to have their experiences reflected back to them, especially around something that just still is not, I think, talked about enough. So again, a lot of appreciation and thanks for being willing to do this. So we'll jump right into some of the questions. The first one is, Chelsea, did you grow up talking about mental or emotional health? And if so, how? And if not, then how did you make sense of that? Why not?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I reached out to you is because my experience was so different than the other videos I was watching. And that's because my mother is a therapist.
Uh-huh.
So my parents are both former hippies. They're very emotional people.
Yeah.
My father is a very sensitive guy too. He's a lawyer, but he's very sensitive. So we never really had toxic masculinity in the house. It was always very emotionally open. And my parents are extremely extroverted, communicative. They'd always be like, "How you doing? How you feeling?" And that's just was kind of the way our life was. Is we had total freedom to talk about anything. And my parents maybe like to talk about too many things that as a 5-year-old might not have been the best thing, but it worked because my sister and I grew up a certain way, and my sister was just saying the other day that my parents' mentality was, as long as we're kind of standing by what we feel or think, it doesn't really matter what other people think as long as they trusted us to do it. So, sometimes the school might have come to them because Amy was making various statements. She was like standing by her guns at 7 years old. And my parents were like, we respect her boldness and that sort of thing. So we were very open with each other. One of the things that was a struggle for all of us is that I'm an extreme introvert and they're extreme extroverts. And that was a really hard dichotomy with, three of them were like, let's go to parties, let's go out, let's do all this thing, let's see like 100 people at our house this week, it'll be great. And I was like, I'm gonna hide under the table, I'll see you guys in 2 days. Yeah. So that was probably our biggest struggle, because in some ways them pushing me to like be forced into these situations is the only reason I'm comfortable with them today. Like I can go to a cocktail party and make small talk. And if they hadn't done that, I might not be comfortable or be very anxious about it, but I'm not. So that's helpful. But it was hard being younger because I was so stressed and anxious around crowds. So that was a whole thing. Yeah. And then the other piece that I mentioned to you before, but is that our family has a history of mental illness, and I happen to be bipolar type 2 as well as many people in my family. And some people might know is that a lot of times bipolar doesn't show itself until later in life. So I really wasn't showing symptoms until my late teens, early 20s, but I always showed my OCD as a child. So my parents knew pretty early that I was doing rituals. I was always anxious about things that didn't make sense. I had all these intrusive thoughts that really freaked me out. So that was something early on. My mom joked, she'd be like, Chelsea, do all your rituals before we leave in 15 minutes. So, it was known that part. And then, but as I got older, it got more extensive. And of course, people, this is normal that I've heard, is that people often think the depression. So I was being treated for depression, but I'm not actually a depressed individual. I'm bipolar. So it wouldn't fix the problem. And there's so I, of course, at that point was like, well, none of this is working. It's not working. They don't understand me, whatever. And so that's why it took me, I think, into my late 20s to get any help, because until then, my experiences hadn't been helpful. Yeah. And also there is this mentality, I think, that even those of us who struggle, or especially those who struggle, is, I'm stronger than this. Yeah. I'm stronger than the illness. Like giving into the illness is actually a sign of weakness. Yeah.
That I could will my way through it. And
yes, I could just find, like with my OCD, it was like I could find ways to make it work. Like I'll do the rituals and it'll make sense, and I'll ignore the intrusive thoughts and not help or treat anything, just deal with the symptoms. And that didn't help logically long term.
Chelsea, would you, for anyone who might be listening who might not be as familiar, or I think people hear some of these terms and kind of maybe jump to some ideas they have. But what's your experience? I'd say, or I'd ask maybe both of OCD and bipolar. Like, how would you describe what it's like in your experience?
Yeah, so OCD I have a longer history with, and I talk about rituals. A lot of people think of OCD as cleaning. Like, I'm so organized, I'm OCD. That's not actually what it's like, because the element that's very a part of it is the obsession and compulsion and the inability. Like, it makes you so anxious that your brain isn't thinking. You say the world isn't going to end if I don't eat things in twos, or that I step on a crack, or some of the things like that, or I didn't close the door correctly. It's your brain is telling you that the world might end Like something will go wrong, like something really terrible is going to happen if you don't do it correctly. So it's not just I'm organized. It's I'm really anxious if it doesn't go perfectly. And then that is what goes. And then also not a lot of people know about the intrusive thoughts, which are a major part, which is your brain coming up with these ideas that are terrible. Normally they're, I wonder how it, like, I jump off a train, it's just really intrusive, weird thoughts that you have that you would never go with, but they just come into your brain. What if you did this? What if you did that? And they don't make any sense and you don't want to do them, but it kind of freaks people out a lot of times because you don't know why it's happening. It doesn't make any sense, but it's all part of like this anxiety. So one of my things with OCD is cycling. So negative cycling. So it's, remember that thing you did when you were 8 years old that was really embarrassing?
Yep.
And like, how about let's obsess for 10 minutes about this thing that you did when you were 8? And then eventually I'll be like, but it's over. I did it. It's done. And then like, it'll go, okay, good. How about this thing when you were 12? And it's so frustrating because you know that it's irrational. Like you know it's irrational, but it still does it. And that's kind of the really frustrating part is when your brain is your enemy.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. So with bipolar, that is more about shifting moods. And like I said, a lot of people think it's depression at first because when you're feeling down, right? People understand the feeling of being low, but what bipolar does, which is dangerous, is it has manic or mania. So in bipolar part 2, it's hypomania. So it's just this state of euphoria. Like it feels so good. I can't even explain it to people. Like you feel on top of the world. You can do anything. You can do 10 projects at once. You're feeling this high energy of like, I can do anything. I can become anything. And I'm going to go out and do these random things. I'm going to come up with ideas. And so you feel good. Yes. And that's why a lot of people don't mark it down when they're talking to a shrink. They're not going to say, and sometimes I feel incredible. Sometimes I feel so good. And because that's not what you tell people, right? You'd be like, I feel terrible about my life right now. And saying I feel incredible is not something that comes in as a problem until you get to the parts where you don't sleep for 3 days. So when I'm in a hypomanic state, it's not the feeling, it's that it can't stop. Like your brain is in such a high wired, energetic state. Yep. So you feel like you can't stop. So at first it's exciting. And then, 2 days later, it's why can't it stop? Why can't I sleep? Why can't I rest? And that's when the problem comes in. Okay. So it's shifting emotions. You go so fast from one to the other. And, in general, in emotions in general, I over time, I've become really aware of what I'm feeling. And with almost everything, I have to go, is this real? Is this you? Or is it your illness? Yeah. Really? Is this how you're feeling? Or is this something else coming in? And even medicated and even getting the therapy and even getting all that help. I mean, one of the hardest things I think about having mental illness is that it's never going to end. There's no cure. And all you can do is maintain, and all you can do is get help and talk things out and find support systems. But I do think that there are times where people get, and I've been there too, where it's like, how is this going to be my life forever? It's never going to go away. And that can be hard to live with. Yeah.
That brings up a couple of questions in my mind. But you mentioning that point just now, I'm curious, Chelsea, does it then strike you the term mental illness? Does that create any kind of misunderstanding for you when like you're saying, like your experience, and it coincides with mine too, that it's not something that gets cured, like people tend to think of illness, I think.
Yeah, I think I've talked to my parents' friends about this because, as you said in the front, people have different ideas of what that term means. And I know that sometimes it's been called manic depressive, and there have been in the past things that could put you in a home or an asylum or something. So now people are more aware of what it means. And he was telling me, he doesn't like the term he's not mentally ill, but he was discussing with me that he didn't like the term mental illness for that point, but also in his brain he was like, but some of the people I know who are some of the smartest, brightest, and I'm like, well, yeah, your brain's on fire. I could see how it would seem that way. But I said the reason I am fine with it is because when you're in this state, you feel sick. I mean, when I'm in a hypomania or when I'm in this thing, I do feel unwell. And I don't know a better term than illness for that feeling when you're stuck in it. And when you're stuck in the cycle, what other term than I just feel sick.
Yeah. And I need something to, and so that brings up the other question for me. So could you say some things, Chelsea, about over time, what you have found to be helpful when you're feeling sick?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing was figuring out what it was and getting a good drink. I mean, we could talk forever about all the complications of trying to put medications and the frustrations of things not working correctly. But, I'm always like, stay with it. Stay with it. When you get there, it's great. I do think checking in with myself, like I told you before, like, is this really how you feel? Or is this something else? And that has been helpful for me in checking. Definitely, there's still some OCD things that's never easy because I still feel the impulse to check things and to do all that. And normally I'm like, okay, I'll go to the door and I'll check it. And this is it. This is the last time. You are going to check that door. You will acknowledge that it is locked. No one's going to get in. And you're going to go to bed. And when I do that, it does help. So remember what you just said to yourself. You're okay. You saw it. It's fine. And so a lot of it, honestly, is finding you have to do it on your own. I mean, you have support systems.
Right.
You have support systems. I have an amazing shrink who also is one of those rare exceptions where she's a therapist and a psychologist. So she can give drugs and therapy, which is rare, but she's amazing. And so she can work on both sides. But, so you have support, you have people who understand, you have all that, and you can go onto message boards and talk to people who have your issues and try to find that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's yourself. You have to work on your own, find the way that you can talk yourself out of certain things. And if I say to myself, is this you? Then I go, you know what? It's not. I actually don't care about it. Like, I don't feel this way. Then you go, okay, bring it down then, because this isn't, now that this isn't how you really feel. And it's kind of like rationalizing with your own self about things. So I think it's awareness. I think it's just keeping, always, you have to have a few people that you trust that you can talk to, where you're just like, sometimes I need you to tell me that this is okay.
Yeah, right.
Because I need somebody to tell me that, because otherwise I'm going to obsess and it's not going to be good for anyone. So you have a few people who can do that. And I mean, I'm talking to you this now freely, but it was a journey.
I'd like to ask you about that piece too, because it sounds like, going back a second to what you were saying earlier, it sounds like there was a really pretty validating home life for you, that these things weren't sort of shamed or judged particularly harsh, especially when you were saying kind of the OCD behaviors were showing up. And I'm still hearing there was a journey for you as far as what, Chelsea, like awareness and perspective on these things?
Yeah, I think it was awareness. I grew up with a family that knows these things, but I never thought about bipolar myself, even though I think that if I heard that term and I looked it up, I would be like, check. I would have figured it out earlier. Yeah. But because, just because we're open about talking doesn't mean we knew specifics,
right.
Or
yeah.
Exactly. And I think it was a journey for myself. My family's very open about it. We don't have any troubles.
Yeah.
Honestly, so much of my family has this. We all have the same problems. All my cousins, like we're all there. I don't know. I know people say we don't know it's genetic, but when you see an entire family having the same stuff, you can see it. But it was for me, I didn't want to believe it. And I didn't want to have to deal with it because so it was my own brain that was the problem. I was like, no, I can handle this. I can make it.
Say something also, I'd love to hear something about just that and then also more of your journey, but like that piece about like, I didn't want to believe it. What was that about for you?
I think I really believed that it was weakness.
Mm.
I really did. I really thought if I was strong and smart and capable, nothing could hold me back. So it was really an inner battle and then I was like, this is something that you can outlive and you can outrun, and you don't need anyone. You don't need help. You don't need medicine. You don't, and this
I think this piece is so huge.
It's really bad. And I think it's insidious that you do this, but I have a lot of bipolar friends, and I'm sure you've heard this, that are very bad at just going cold turkey off their medication. And one of the things is, and I've heard this myself, is you say, but I'm doing well now. I'm even. Right. I've got it. I am in a good place. I understand my illness. I do not need help anymore. I don't need it. I'm good now. And then, of course, you go off it. It's bam, right down. Everything comes back. You've forgotten. I've never gone on but I've talked through my friends. Yep. Because I know it's bad. I know, but my brain still is like, I think you could do it. I think you're different. I think you could do it.
You can handle this.
It's so wild. I always laugh because I'm like, it's weird talking about it because it's like talking about that your brain is detached from you somehow. Yep. When you're talking about it, it's
right.
It's so bizarre because I'm talking about how my brain is working against me and arguing with me, which sounds a little crazy, doesn't it? Yeah. But it's reality, and I say crazy in the crazy terms, but when I talk about it, it feels that way.
Right.
Even though I know it's irrational.
So how did you get from that place of like, this is just straight up weakness to something else?
So I went through a really bad period, and I went into some destructive habits that is actually pretty normal, of self-medicating perhaps, or the one problem for me was always the hypomania, because you feel so good but you don't think rationally. So for me it was always sleep. My therapist is always like, have you been sleeping? And that's where it is. But the hypomania, when I would be up for 4 days and I just couldn't stop, and I was jittery. And so the more I did that, the more I recognized that I couldn't stop, and that was scary. Like I couldn't make it stop. It's not like with depression where I could try to psych myself up or watch something that made me feel better or talk to people. With hypomania, you just can't. You can't pull that down. It's just at that point. So when I realized that was happening, this wasn't just a really exciting creative period of time. It was actually dangerous, like the way I was acting. Because you also, with hypomania, have a feeling of I can do anything, and that encourages really dangerous behaviors. Like I can go out in a 15-degree day or negative 15. And I don't need to wear any things because I feel great. I feel amazing. I could jump off this high point and like go into the water, dive here. It'll be totally fine because I can do anything. And that is like that's the level of which you can get. Not everyone does. I'm not saying this is my experience, but I was definitely like, you're fine. You can do these risky things. You can do anything. You're going to be all right. And then afterwards you go, what I could have died. I could have hurt somebody. I could have done all these irrational things that I made so much sense at the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is hard stuff to talk about, but if I feel like if anyone had talked about this before, I would have gotten help before. I would have realized what was happening.
Pattern quicker. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, OC at that point I was pretty comfortable with, but I didn't recognize this, and it was definitely starting late teens, early 20s. And like I said, I didn't get help until my late 20s, like 29. I didn't get any help,
Yeah.
and it just got worse. So, I mean, it's hard to talk about, but it's necessary because it was an elephant in the room. Even when you come from a family who cares about these
Really
things, still
affirming.
there.
Yeah. So, so this pattern of destructive habits ensued, and then it sounds like, uh, what was the turning point for you?
It was definitely when my hypomania was becoming destructive. When I was worried, I came down from it, and I was worried about the actions. I was worried that I was going to hurt myself or others.
Yeah.
And it's not that I would be intentional in any way, but the reckless behavior was not good. And that was what it was for me. I realized that it wasn't just me being, not awake for days, like drawing or doing stuff. That wasn't what I was doing anymore. I was convincing myself to go out and do things, and that was when it was. So I was like, okay, this is getting dangerous. This is getting destructive. This is bad. So at this point I was in London, so I was really far away from my family and anyone I knew. And I was like, I started worrying myself. And so I came home and I said, I need something like right now.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't know, just going in a bad direction. I'm not going to do that. So that's when I took it seriously.
Yeah.
And it's really hard, and it's hard to talk about, but it's good to talk
Yeah.
about.
No, I appreciate it so much. I often sort of reserve a question like this for the end, but I'm kind of moved to ask you in this moment, Chelsea, like, because we know a lot of people in our lives. We know students who are struggling in these ways. A lot more than I think a lot of folks realize. Is there anything you would say to them if they might find themselves in the place that you were in?
Yeah, I would. I mean, first of all, I would say that you're not alone. I know people say that, but I also feel like, it's like a saying now, but it's also true. And if you're in a place where you feel alone and you hear that and you believe it, it makes a huge difference. Like,
Yeah.
people are so afraid to talk about these things even now, and it's just very dangerous and I'm not saying in the way I'm dangerous, it's the way that it'll keep people from getting help. And it's that if you feel really in your brain, I'm telling people this, if you feel I am stronger than this is weakness, I am better than this, there's no better than. It's not you're overcoming it, and it's not you're undercovering. It's not that you're losing yourself. There's nothing wrong with getting help. And my shrink told me something that works for me. I don't know if it's going to work for everyone, but when I was like, I can't, because she goes, okay, do you get angry or at people who have heart disease and need help? Do you get angry at people who have lung disease and need help? And I was like, well, of course not. That's different. She goes, it's not, because your brain chemistry is real. She's like, your brain is is a thing. It is, what's happening to you is biological, just like those things. So getting medicine or getting help for it is the same thing as going through these processes.
Right. That's right.
And that logic went, okay, so I have an illness like anyone else does. And I think the weakness is always the danger spot. I'm better, I'm stronger. It's if I ignore this, then I can overcome it and I'm better than that. But if I don't, then I'm weak and pathetic.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting too. And my experience is that for any folks struggling with serious mental health issues, that they would probably even extend it to not just health conditions, that if it was another person dealing with bipolar and needing help, like, would you judge them so harshly for seeking?
I always tell people, be as kind to yourself as you would be to other people, because I feel like a lot of people are very kind and understanding to their friends or to other struggles. But if you look at yourself, it's different. Yeah. I'm pathetic. They're not pathetic. like
Yeah.
that they're doing that. But it's just, you have to, that's a really important piece. You have to be kind to yourself because it's going to be hard. And I'm talking about some stuff, but we all are hit by different things at time, and depression and isolation. And if you're feeling really rough about some things, be nice to yourself. It's okay to feel that way. And it's okay to reach out to somebody if you're having you don't have to do it alone or community. You have friends, you have family. If you don't, there are online forums. There are ways to reach out and find people. I was on a bunch of forums at this point that with other people going through the same things. It's hard to explain to people who don't understand it. So even though they're trying to help.
Yeah.
So there are people.
What would you say, Chelsea? I totally hear you. And then a part of me too is like hearing like maybe what students would say, or even, I know this can sound like a therapist question, but even what your younger self would say if you were talking to them like this, right? Like your 29-year-old self or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, I hear you. That sounds great. Maybe it's good for you, but like that doesn't work for me,
Yes.
What would you say?
I would say I think everyone is in control of their own situation. So if they're not ready yet, that's also okay. I mean, I really hope not everyone hits the point I hit before they do. And maybe they won't. Maybe it's different for them. But it's possible things are different for everyone. It is. And not everyone's going to hit the same things. That's okay too. You have your own thing. But you have to, I think it's more just, you have to be honest with yourself and be okay with it. And that is a personal thing. So I might not resonate with you, but just think about the way you're feeling and consider even if it has nothing to do with my struggle, is this where you want your life to be forever? Is this how you want to feel forever?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really it. Like, maybe it's temporary, but a lot of times it's not temporary. It's, right. Is this the life you want to live for yourself? Is this how you want to be 5 years from now? Do you still want to carry this sadness and carry this weight when you don't have to? You don't have to do it.
Right.
There's no one requiring that from you. Yeah. And so that's what I would say. I mean, the whole term, it gets better, is something. And I think what's hard about that is that if you think to yourself, it gets better and then it doesn't get better, where are you on that list now?
Right.
And that's kind of a thing you have to self-check in and be like, is this still better than 5 years ago? It's probably.
Yeah. I can totally hear that. I can relate to it in my own experience of asking, like sometimes forcing myself to ask that question of like, I recognize I've been here before. Do I want to keep doing it this way? Or like, do I need to keep going about it this way?
It's hard because we get into patterns. And if you survive, you're already surviving it.
Yeah.
And then why would you change? You've got it. You've gotten through it. But you've already done it. So then you're like, I can keep doing this forever. Do you want to do this forever?
Right.
Is that really
right. What if there's another way? What if there's
if you have the opportunity to change it, wouldn't you? Yeah. If you could. And I do think that if people are honest with themselves, they will, because you don't want to be there forever. It's not a great place wherever you're at. Yeah. And sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's not. And so it's a process. It's a lifelong process.
It really is.
That is the hardest part. It is a lifelong process to find mental health.
Chelsea, what would you say, a question that comes up, and is one of the reasons why we have these conversations is, how would you talk about like who you are and where you come from, like your identities, like, and how those things have shaped your journey through all this? Yeah.
So, I would say that I'm somebody who has gone through a lot of struggles and come out stronger for it. And though saying that makes it seem like you forget the struggles that got you there. So sure. I'm always aware of that. I would say overall, I'm a pretty positive person. that just unfortunately has some weird brain chemistry that is doing stuff. But I came from a positive home environment, which is just so lucky, blessed, hashtag blessed. But I am somebody who's always going forward, trying my best. Obviously I'm very in touch. So, I mean, my job is social media, and I love it so much. I love it so much with every beat of my heart. I love it, but it's also complicated, just like everything in life. It is a complicated world. And so I don't even know if I call it surviving, because I don't know surviving mental illness. I don't think it is. I think it's living with it every day and being okay and finding ways to be okay. And just basically living life and trying your best and being okay if sometimes you're not your best. It's the worst, right? It's just terrible when you feel that way. And this whole year has been hard because, like I said, I think in my head, is this you? Is this your illness? And now is it the isolation for an entire year? It could be any of those things. And I really worry about people because I'm more, from everything you've just heard, I'm more aware myself than a lot of people, so I can acknowledge where I'm at mentally with this whole year. And I think that I worry more about people who aren't used to it and are struggling more with, how do you do this now that it is a new situation? And that's hard. I really wish I could help with that, but it's something you have to do, and you have to acknowledge, and you have to feel, and everyone's going through it right now. And I keep telling people, you're going through something terrible. We all are. And you, again, kind to yourself, understand that no one's being their best right now. It's hard to be your best in this state. And if you're not your best all the time, like you have to learn how to forgive that. You have to forgive yourself if you're having your bad moments. It's okay. We're all having our bad moments. And I think communication's been really hard because of that. And I've talked about social media because that's what I do. And it's always been a place that's either great or toxic. There's two ways. You're either doing great and it's a positive place that fills all this information, connects you to people you've never met before, does all this networking, but like wonderful conversations, news you never know about, everything. And your family you might have met twice, but now you know everything about them. It's great stuff. But you've got all the darkness, because it's can bring out everyone's worst traits, and there's anonymous connections to that, and there's doom scrolling. Dear goodness, I do it all the time. Doom scrolling is so bad for you, and I warn people because it's just a cycle of negativity, and if you're already there, it'll just settle on you. So the world's problems are your problems. And I don't think it's bad. I don't think you should never look at it. You should know what's happening. And it's just kind of gauge with yourself. Am I going too far into this? Is this ruining my life? No, but it's like, is this actually not healthy for me? Am I feeling worse for doing this? And is that good or is that bad? And that is, I don't think people should disconnect. I actually believe social media is an amazing thing. But it's definitely, you have to find your moderation. You have to choose what your moderation is. And if you were like, is this helping me or hurting me? In the end, just take a walk. You don't have to detach forever if you think it's important. But, take a breather. No one in the world is at their best in that second. It's like some people are good on the fly, but if you're in a heightened state because of social media in particular, there's so much bad that comes from snap judgments or snap choices. And I always laugh because, you see all these celebrities aside, but you see all these celebrities making really bad choices on social media. And I'm like, a lot of the time is because they're not in that moment. They're not thinking. They're just reacting. And that's a human thing. And that's a terrible, that's what we all do. That is not always healthy or happy. And then all these misunderstandings. Sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it's the right thing. But or sometimes they're showing themselves. So I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm saying that there are people who just react, and it's just, I then reacted emotionally, and I said something that in my rational state I would have never said, and I feel bad now because it's out there, it's done. I did it. So I kind of am always like, I always tell myself, why don't you take a beat? Because you want to reply, you want to say something to this person, you do, and I'm like, I'm gonna take a beat. I'm gonna question myself. Is this gonna make it better? Is this so important that I do have to say it? Because sometimes it is. Sometimes it is important,
sure.
And it's worth it. But it's still good to just have a moment to check with yourself to make sure this is the choice you want to make. And then if it's yes, I want to do this, then do it. But it would be like just a second, 5 seconds. Take a breath. Go. Wait. Okay, I'm doing it. I'm going to reply to this person. I'm going to do it. But I do love social media. It's a difficult place to be, because a lot of people are like, oh my God, this is the worst. It brings out the worst in everyone. Let's just close it all. No, that's not rational. That it's good stuff. It's done so many good things for people, but it's dark. You have your moments. So I guess it's like I'm always like, find a healthy relationship with social media, a healthy relationship with yourself, healthy relationship with social media.
As you're talking about them, maybe I want to just ask you one last question, because I think you're offering so much in the way of different kinds of perspective and life advice naturally with what you're talking about, Chelsea. So don't have to ask some of my other questions. But for now, I'm just curious if you'd say anything about, since you're talking about social connections, I don't know if you'd agree, but I very much think of mental health as an identity too, and it has its own culture, and it has its own kind of has its own stigma, has its own ways of being marginalized and oppressed in different ways. Do you build social connections around the mental health challenges that you struggle with? Like, do you have community around that?
I it's a mix. Like I told you, I have a lot of bipolar friends. It's happened over time. And I have created them or gotten them. And, we definitely have our moments of therapize each other. Like, are you okay? Are you sure you're stable? And like all that stuff. But I really feel like, because I'm openly talking to you about this, and it's because I've openly talked about it with people over time. And I've decided, in my case, I'm removing the stigma. I'm done with it.
And you said you keep a blog, right?
I've written a few blogs about it, and I put it out there, and because like you asked earlier, can you describe what it actually is? Which I think is something no one really knows unless you're in it. So I wrote a few. This is actually what it is. This is how I feel when I'm in this state. This is what it is. And so because I've been really open about it, it's been people feel comfortable talking about it, because I'm comfortable talking about it. And I've had a few friends who didn't identify. And then we talked it out, and they got help. They went and they talked to somebody about it, and they might not have had bipolar, but they might have had OCD, and they might have had a depression that they weren't acknowledging, and all that sort of thing. So it is a part of my identity, because it's part of my permanent life situation. It's just forever.
Yeah.
And this is who I am. And because I waited so long to believe in that, it was a problem. So that's why I'm like, no, I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to encourage people, because if I hadn't, then I would be a different person today, and who knows what would have happened to me. Yeah. So
that resonates with me too. Thank you for saying that.
Somehow I've become the spokesperson with the people I know, of get help. Mental health is good, and you have to talk. And so, because it saved my life, it saved my life.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Thank you so much, Chelsea. I super appreciate your voice in this, and the way you express yourself, and being so open about your process and your journey.
Yeah, I talked to my coworker Janie, who talked to you before, and she said if hearing it means something to one person, it's worth
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And in that vein, we could encourage any of our listeners of this to reach out to you if they want to follow up or have questions.
Of course, I'm so willing to do that. My email is cdoyle doyle at bowdoin.edu. If you would like to reach out, at any time, I'm honest here. You can just throw anything you'd like at me.
Really, really, that comes through.
I just
That
told you
means
for
a
like
lot.
30 minutes. So you know so much about me now, viewer. feel free to throw anything at me. I promise you, I'm probably one of the least judgmental people you'll know because of this. So I mean, if it just one person has a question,
That
then
comes through too, Chelsea.
I'm so glad. It would mean so much to me if it did make a difference. So
thank you, and thanks so much for this.